Study Session 2, Social Planning. Introduction. Social planning is an effort to improve the quality and quantity of information used to inform decisions about social policies, programs, and services, and increase the use of rational techniques in the decision-making process itself. In this study session, we will discuss the purposes, importance, types, and stages of social planning. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to 1. Define, use correctly the term planning. 2. Enumerate purpose of planning. 3. State importance of social planning. 4. List types of planning. 5. Examine the concept of planning. 6. Point out stages of social planning. 1. What is planning? Planning, in the conceptual approach, embraces all disciplines such as philosophy, political science, sociology, history, psychology, and economics. However, it is recognized by those who seek the means for rational action that there is included in the process of decision-making an intangible element. This intangible element in the planning process cannot be entirely laid at the door of lack of scientific information. It consists of something fundamental which is located at the heart of the decisions itself and involves a choice among values which have a political and moral nature. In other words, the best of plan may not see the light of day if there is no political support for it. Also, a plan may not succeed for long if it lacks moral value. All these may be regarded as an intangible element but are important. In social planning, there are no mathematical formulas, equations, or models which can provide a basis for decisions involving choices among unrelated values. Social planning, as opposed to general planning, derives its potency from the support and cooperation of the stakeholders. General planning may come as a result of decisions of responsible officials or deliberations of governing bodies. Political decisions in social planning are very pertinent and provide plenty of examples for essential choices. For instance, political decision looks at the preferences of liberty to well-being, to security, to people, and vice versa. The requirements for security and of well-being are themselves often contradictory. How far is it desirable to reduce the welfare of the present generation and work for future generations? This is a political issue which has a direct impact on social planning. Social planning always meets both implicitly and explicitly with these problems of choices between values or objectives with different levels of realization. 2. Purpose of social planning. The final goal of planning is basically social. Economic activity, therefore, appears essentially as a means of achieving social ends. Moreover, planning must occur in a whole series of social sectors. Social planning should not be seen as an end in itself, but should be seen as a means towards social progress. Planning activities strive for coherence, rationality, and efficiency. Planning calls for forecasting, preparation, organization, and control. Social planning policy. By the sides, the specific process that is followed in decision making and the decisions are related to a plan that is prepared, taken, and reviewed in specific organizational structures, especially an administrative system. In social planning, it is essential that there be relatively strong administrative machinery for the plan, but this should function in such a way as to avoid bureaucratic distortions and to assure that the planners are saved from technocratic temptations. In order to do this, it is important to preserve the supremacy of political power in relation to fundamental decisions concerning a plan and to provide for decentralization of the plan and participation of all stakeholders through appropriate measures and through institution of adequate structures and procedures. The value of social planning is in facilitating adaptation to change. Social planning stimulates and directs growth. It eases economic and social adjustments. Social planning is also a method of adjustment of evolution, which in the process of growth makes possible the elimination of unnecessary and unfair hardship and injustice. Social planning is the core of every developmental project. Through social planning, schools, houses, hospitals, markets, and others are built to serve the people. This tells the importance of social planning in our day-to-day life in relation to social services and amenities. Before we examine the aspects, components, and implications of the concept of social planning, it is necessary to make a distinction and choice in the interpretation of the words plan or planning. In their very common and loose meaning, these terms indicate that a minimum of forecasting, organization, and order is inserted in the process of decision and action. In that sense, it may be said that everybody plans, at least when a considered decision or action is to be rational and efficient. Management in business and administrative activities in human organizations always include a certain amount of planning in this broad interpretation of the term. Social planning is the specific process that is followed in decision making, and the decisions are related to a plan that is prepared, taken and reviewed in specific organizational structures, especially an administrative system. Therefore, planning starts with the assessment of situation or problems and then what to do. Assessment sets the stage for the intervention. Planning may be regarded as an attempt to answer questions before they arise in real life, and may also be said to be making implementation decisions before implementation. McMahon, Burton, and Piot, 1980. Implementation decisions commonly deal with how implementation can best proceed. Social planning, like general planning, includes the specification of some evaluation criteria, rules, norms, etc., that will provide a basis for implementation decisions. Planning is a method of trying to ensure that resources available now and in the future are used in the most efficient way to obtain explicit objectives. The concepts of planning are: 1. Where are we going? Objectives. 2. With what? Resources. 3. How? Efficient implementation. And 4. When? Future. Green, 1994. The definition also implies a degree of formalization, explicitness, and method about process. Planning involves a system of making decisions about how an organization will use its resources in the future. 3. Importance of social planning. Social planning usually indicates what is to be expected, what is being done, taking place now, and what has been done. What is happening and what will happen are based on what has been done. Social planning projects into the future to give the people good and deserved life. Social planning targets social services and amenities for the people. This could be schools with the aim of improving the educational level of the people, hospitals for the health of the people, housing scheme for the people to be well sheltered, and social welfare services to restore persons with some kinds of social dysfunction such as marital dispute, truancy, and so on, back to the society. The social planners must be convinced of the plans they are formulating and be committed to it. Social planning is a conglomerate of politics, history, philosophy, culture, and economics. All these are prominent in social planning. It is important in specifying tasks and roles, personnel, and resources in all good plans. Therefore, the importance of social planning in our society cannot be overemphasized, especially when planning for social work programs. What is the situation? Rational planning. Green, 1994. Take action. Where do we want to go? Which alternative best? Which possible is alternatives are? Thereafter action. 4. Types of planning. The following are the types of planning in the holistic manner. 4.1. Planning in the public and private sectors. Planning in its technical sense, in economic, social, and other activities may be practiced in private businesses and voluntary organizations, as well as by public authorities, national, state, and local. Planning in the public sector, and especially planning at the national level, is of course of paramount interest due to its methodological complexity and its political implications. We should not lose sight of the particular aspect of planning which concerns non-governmental activities in social matters and the existing or desirable relationships between plans of both sectors. 4.2. Degree of institutionalization. The planning process and system may be strongly institutionalized, especially at the level of the central government. This signifies that there exist planning organs and administration distinct from the other political and administrative institutions, but closely related to them. This type of planning may be called organic. On the other hand, the planning process may be diffused through societies and various governing bodies, rather than being located in organs specifically created for the purpose. The national budget, which is a tool of economic and social redistribution, is also an instrument for elucidating the essential choices and priorities of national policy. 4.3. Different organizational aspects of planning. Planning concerns the whole set of economic and social objectives as well as ways and means to achieve them. Each sector of activities subsequently is subject to more detailed programming. It is possible to find plans established for a certain number of sectors, especially in the social field, education, health, labor, etc. This is sectoral or vertical planning or programming. For example, we have national health policy with its own plan of action. We have social development policy with its own plan of action, and so on. Also, plans in public affairs may be set up not only at the national level, but also at state and local government levels. This is decentralization of the planning process. 4.4. Degree of compulsion of the national plan. A plan established at the national level may be completely binding upon the citizens, business, enterprises, and other organizations, especially in the highly centralized national government. It may, on the other hand, be simply informational or indicative. in which case its significance consists only in the fact that it provides relevant information to private enterprises in a market economy as well as groups and citizens. Where social work comes in and thus indirectly encourages them to forecasting and coherence in action. It may be stimulating or incitative, particularly by granting legal or financial incentives, subsidies, loans to enterprises and social welfare organizations if they adjust their activities and investments to the provision of the national plan. In practice, in many countries, including Nigeria, the national plan or its equivalent is partly compulsory, especially for public departments and corporations, partly stimulating, especially for private enterprises and social welfare organizations, and of course, informational for all individuals and bodies concerned. 4.5. Time span of the plan. The period of the plan varies according to the country concerned and the fields under consideration. We may distinguish roughly short-range plans, 1 or 2 years, middle-range plans, 4 or 5 years, and finally, long-range plans, more than 5 years. But whatever be the period of the plan, it must be conceived with the view of a more remote horizon. For example, in planning for 5 years, we need to consider anticipated trends and developments within the next 10 to 15 years. 5. Concept of planning. At the national level, planning concerns itself with the optimum utilization of all available material and human resources so that over the period of a plan, national wealth increases, thereby achieving an adequate standard of living. 5.1. Economic planning. To be effective, planning should be comprehensive and embrace all aspects of development such as economic, social and political as well as physical and technological. All these aspects are closely interrelated and have an impact on the attainment of balanced development and a good life for the individual, family, and society as a whole. For the same reason, effective comprehensive planning should take into consideration the balanced development of the various national, state, and local areas, and involve participation of the people at the local level with effective decentralization of the planning and implementation process, so that citizens may play a conscious and self-satisfying role in the process of planning for national development. Such development will have to relate itself to international conditions and to cooperate in the task of evolving an interrelated world economy and society, if communities and nations are to live in peace and harmony for all the peoples of the world. This should at least be the rational goal to be aimed at through concerted efforts at balanced economic, social and cultural development of the human family as a whole. In developing countries particularly, economic development is likely to be the precursor of social development, for it is hardly possible for the latter to be viable without minimum economic standards. 2. Social and economic planning. Among the relationships between the different aspects of development planning, the most important indeed is that of economic and social aspects. Generally speaking, one can say that the aims of planning are fundamentally social, whereas economic targets are only a means towards this end. Of course, economic and social planning are closely interrelated. Not only may it be necessary or judged as such to attain certain economic targets before seeking to reach certain goals in social welfare, but certain specific social objectives such as promotion of education, increasing and improvement of housing are also to be considered as economic means for the growth of production. In other words, the problem of determining priorities arises when one considers the relationships between economic planning and social planning, or more exactly, the relations between economic and social aspects of a development plan. 3. Procedural and structural elements. Social planning conveys two aspects of development which are not necessarily antithetics to each other. One aspect deals with social policy with regard to developmental planning as a whole, laying down social norms and values for distribution and consumption of the wealth created by economic development. The other aspect deals with sectoral functional planning of what are called social services, such as welfare, social security, etc. Both are legitimate spheres of social planning, since the consequences of economic and technological developments can work for the good man or can prove deleterious to his physical, mental, and moral health. Even though social planning is closely interrelated with economic planning, in the National Development Plan, it has considerable autonomy in its sectoral aspects after fundamental objectives have been fixed. 2.6. Prerequisites of social planning. Planning in general, and social planning especially, is a rather recent field of activity. If we take the term as we propose to do in a technical sense, planning still lacks intellectual and informational tools, skilled practitioners, and finally participation of people. And this latter need must be satisfied not only for the sake of freedom and democracy, but also for greater efficiency. 6.1. Need for social research. Research in social planning is the collection of exact data, qualitative and quantitative as in surveys, objective interpretation of them, construction of proposed models for action. Of course, this kind of research is also scientific in spirit and approach. However, its target is directly practical. This makes it rather different from fundamental research. These types of research are related to each other. Since planning has to be based on identified needs, available resources, forecasts of demographic resources, forecasts of demographic growth and of economic, social, and technological development, a vast amount of pertinent, accurate, and systematized data is required for effective and efficient planning. Practical research is essential, and pilot projects need to be conducted to test the value and usefulness of programs on a manageable scale. Before a vast network of similar projects is simultaneously undertaken all over a country, this prevents the risk of wastage of resources. 6.2. Need for social planners. There is a need for planners in general, especially for social planners. It is desirable to have a plan for producing planners and for training future practitioners. 6.3. Need for participation. Since one of the essential goals of socioeconomic development is a greater well-being of the individual and family in an harmonious society, certain fundamental values need to be emphasized as applicable to all developmental planning. A healthy balance has to be struck between individual freedom and social planning so that the individual may attain the fullest enrichment of life while contributing his best to the common effort for social progress. 6.4. Planning in a democratic framework. Planning in a democratic framework should therefore allow the widest possible participation of individuals, groups, organizations, local, state, and national bodies as an essential part of the process. The participation of individuals, groups, and organizations in the elaboration and carrying out of a plan directly or indirectly through deliberative or consultative bodies is not only a question of preserving freedom and democracy or preventing usurpation of power by the planners, but it is also a question of efficiency, pertinent forecasting, and making of rational choices. The participation of individuals and groups brings an amount of relevant information which very often will be difficult and expensive to collect through other means, and especially through systematic investigations. Furthermore, their reactions to a plan may well be a most useful instrument. 7. Stages of social planning. The steps or stages of social planning may not particularly differ from the steps of other planning processes or any decision-making process, but these steps are followed for efficient and effective social planning. Since planning is the process of conceptualizing and anticipating future action, therefore, when planning, the planner must elaborate what he or she wants to achieve in the future and how he or she will proceed. The starting point may be an idea that occurred to him or her, or a particular situation which is felt to be unsatisfactory. Planning a social welfare service can take place at any level in the social welfare system. Planning Y includes the steps shown in figure 2.1. Steps on planning. 1. Looking at the situation. 2. Selecting objectives. 3. Setting objectives. 4. Formulating alternative courses of action. 5. Analyzing feasibility. 6. Writing the plan. 7.1. Looking at the situation. The situation that requires planning is critically looked into and described. Information using acceptable statistical tools are gathered and analyzed. The true position of the situation is then inferred. We may at this point claim to have made a diagnosis of the situation. 7.2. Selecting problems. Several problems or diagnoses may emerge from the situation. Therefore, several objectives are set and then these objectives are prioritized. A choice of these objectives is made for implementation. 7.3. Setting objectives. This is a stage where arbitration between selected objectives is made. Determination of an order of preference or priority with consideration of the respective levels of the objectives in question according to certain criteria more or less strictly defined. Also, there is a search for coherence and compatibility among the targets, since certain of them are closely interdependent. In other words, it appears that fixing priorities is required by scarcity of resources and means, whereas compatibility is a logical and technical problem. 7.4. Formulating alternative courses of action. This is a stage where determination of ways of action is made. Search for the best route. Consideration of steps to be taken. Timetable, conditions in which means and resources are put into operation. 7.5. Analyzing feasibility. Whatever action that is decided on is subjected to analytical consideration or evaluation. This is what is known as process evaluation. The purpose is to put right any area of deficiency noticed in the process of action. It is to be noted that planning is in fact a continuous process, and information collected in execution and review may and even must be used for adaptation of the present plan and the preparation of succeeding plans. 7.6. Writing the plan. Every plan is arrived at as it is written down for effective and efficient implementation and for proper monitoring and documentation. It is also written for guidance and control of physical or final execution, especially coordination of tasks. The public authorities contribute to the execution of the plan in different ways, in different situations. This may be through legal provision, financial measures, and of course direct action in the public field. Although this process may be very general, social planning offers certain specific aspects in contrast to economic or physical planning. Generally speaking, it may be said that it is less formalized in its methods and more subjective in the decision taking. Collecting precise and especially quantitative information, except for certain fields, is often difficult. The approach is, however, becoming more and more scientific. Example, in the industrial and economic affairs. The social field may not tend itself to stating problems in a systematic way, constructing models, mathematizing the components of the decisions, elaborating accurate criteria of choice. Finally, the emotional content obviously plays an important role. Study session summary. In this study session, we discuss the importance of social planning and the various types of planning we have. We also explored economic planning and development as the precursor of social development, and finally, we analyzed the steps in social planning as important for effective and efficient planning. End of study session 2. Thank you for listening.